Welcome along to the Irish NFL Show. I'm Kieran O'Donovan. Earlier in the week, in the wake of the Pittsburgh Steelers' defeat to the Houston Texans, the news emerged that coach Mike Tomlin had decided to step down. Mike Tomlin, of course, head coach in Pittsburgh since 2007, just the third head coach in the Steelers organization since 1969, back when Chuck Noll was hired. With me to discuss that and have a quick look back on the Steelers season, I'm delighted to be joined once again by Bryant McFadden. Brian, it's great to have you on.
Thank you for having me.
Last time we talked ball, Brian, it was face-to-face in Dublin. Such a special memory for us here on the Irish NFL Show. What a weekend you provided for us with some great entertainment in the Arlington Hotel. And we had the pleasure of accompanying you to Croke Park, where we met yourself and Jerome Bettis. It was really an unforgettable experience. How have you been since, Brian?
I've been great. I've been great, man. Thank you once again for the hospitality out in Dublin. My first time going to Dublin, the experience did not disappoint. I had a great time. Steeler Nation was there from start to finish. And most importantly, we got a big win against the Minnesota Vikings. And since then, as you know, in the NFL season has been entertaining week in and week out. You know, the parity associated with these games, you don't know what is going to happen. You think you don't know. And now we're in the midst of the playoffs as getting round two. Now it has become even more exciting, just living up to the billing when it comes to the anticipation with all of these games.
Absolutely. And when we look at this back at the Steelers season, that weekend in Dublin was probably one of the highlights for many reasons, from an emotional point of view and from a performance point of view as well. They went on after that to kind of win when we expected them to lose, and they lost when we expected them to get the job done. They got to the postseason again, kept that phenomenal record of no losing seasons under Mike Tomlin. Won a division that they probably had no right to win, such as the predicted or expected talent within that division. Unfortunately, they just came up against a buzzsaw against the Texans. How do you look back and how do you evaluate the Steelers season?
Well, to your point, I think if you go back to the predictions for the finishes in each division, most people had the Steelers probably finishing third behind Baltimore, behind Cincinnati. And things happen, throughout the NFL, but Pittsburgh never made any excuses. They just found ways to win the necessary games that led to them winning the division, the AFC North, with a 42-year-old quarterback in Aaron Rodgers. Yeah. So that wasn't expected, for the naysayers, to say the least. So being able to win your division, that is a major accomplishment, because when you do that, you automatically get a seat in the tournament and you host a playoff game, in which they did. So I think for the expectations for football fans who are not tied to the Pittsburgh Steelers, they exceeded those expectations by winning their division. Now, of course, you didn't have the postseason success that you wanted to have, but just being able to get into the playoffs is always a bright spot. So I feel like the season, it wasn't a waste. It wasn't a wash. It was entertaining. It was competitive. And like I said, I think they exceeded the expectations, because most people felt like the Pittsburgh Steelers, going back to the month of August, getting ready for the NFL season in 2025, felt like they would be the third best team in the division, and they finished one.
Obviously, the big news in the wake of that defeat to the Texans is the departure of longtime coach Mike Tomlin. And, you've got an emotional attachment to this as well, having played under Mike Tomlin. Look, as I mentioned, there've been three coaches of the Pittsburgh Steelers going back to 1969. Such a phenomenal statistic, and just evidence of such a well-run organization. And even in Mike Tomlin's departure, there was no Saturday Night Massacre. There was no breakdown in relationship between, or evidence of a breakdown relationship between ownership and the coach. Mike Tomlin got to go out on his own terms, and probably the way everyone would have wanted to see it. It was dealt with class and dignity. There was no drama surrounding it. How did you react as a former player of Coach Tomlin, and what was your initial thought when you heard the news?
I mean, my reaction was, was bittersweet, because Mike Tomlin has meant a lot to a lot of us when it comes to his former players. And I played quite a few years under Mike Tomlin. We had a lot of success. And he's a good dude. He does things the right way. And it's easy to respect the man who does things the right way. And he's so relatable. And I understand, you know, most of Steeler Nation, they became a bit annoyed with the lack of postseason success. And some fans might have felt like this was the right thing to do in terms of parting ways. But me personally, I felt like, no, he still had a lot left to give the game of football. I felt like he still had a lot to give the Pittsburgh Steelers. And for him, he did what he felt was best for him. And I respect that. But, you know, it's hard to, you know that you won't see him on the sidelines anymore. You won't see how animated he is, involved in the game. You won't hear him, you know, talking to the media and dropping his Tomlinisms at any given time. But his mark will forever be felt in the National Football League. His mark will forever be felt in the Steelers organization.
I mean, there's little doubt that, I believe that Mike Tomlin is going to end up in Canton. He's heading to the Hall of Fame. And I believe you posted something along a similar vein on social media this week. He's tied for 9th in all-time coach, head coach wins. And he's the guys that he's keeping company are, it's George Halas, it's Curly Lambeau. He's tied with Chuck Noll, the legendary Chuck Noll. There's no doubt of his, no doubting his legendary status and his legacy in the game. So do you feel, taking the emotion out of it, do you feel that this was the right time for this departure, for this journey to end with Pittsburgh? And how, how do you feel about Pittsburgh then moving forward without Mike Tomlin? Because there's been a lot of reporting that players took this really, really hard. TJ Watt was apparently very emotional. Joey Porter Jr., you played with his dad. I mean, he would have been around Mike Tomlin from a very young age. There's a lot of guys have been shaken up by this news and possibly didn't want it to end. But, how do you how do you see the positives for Pittsburgh? And does it give you hope that a new era may be the platform for, further success in Pittsburgh?
I mean, I felt like he still had something left to give the game. I felt that way. Now, I haven't been in the locker room with him in quite some times, but every year when I visit the Pittsburgh Steelers and I talk to him, we talk ball, man, he's excited. So I felt like the passion and the love was still there. Now, moving forward with the Pittsburgh Steelers, history tells us anytime they've had to hire a new coach, they usually get it right. Now, it's only been 3 times, right? This will be the 4th time. But so far, they're 3-0 in getting it right. When Chuck Noll retired, they brought in, this will be the 3rd time. So when Chuck Noll retired, they brought in Bill Cowher. Yeah. When Bill Cowher retired, they brought in Mike Tomlin. Now, Mike Tomlin is gone. So the previous 2 coaches all replaced a Super Bowl winning coach. Right? Bill Cowher replaced Chuck Noll, who was a Super Bowl winning coach. Mike Tomlin replaced Bill Cowher, who was a Super Bowl winning coach. So all I'm saying is,
big shoes to fill.
Big shoes to fill. And I feel like the organization will do their due diligence and making sure who they bring in the building can not only fill those shoes, but run in them as well.
It must be pretty badass for you to feel like, or to know that you've won a Super Bowl for 66% of those great coaches that you just named. So that's an achievement in itself. Speaking of replacements, are there any names floating around Pittsburgh? Any names? I know you're a CBS analyst. You guys are talking about this on a daily basis. Are there any kind of contenders emerging? The latest I heard was Rams defensive coordinator Chris Shula was in the mix. Whether there is any truth to that or not, I don't know.
I mean, there's a laundry list of names I've heard they've requested interviews from. Chris Shula is a name in the mix. He comes from a football family. He's done a great job with the Rams, and he kind of fits that mold, a defensive-minded coach. Still, young in his years, and seeing how the previous 2 coaches were hired, young in their years, and they come from a defensive-minded system as well, kind of fits the mold. Brian Flores is another guy. Remember, he was a part of the Steelers coaching staff some years ago under Mike Tomlin. And, he eventually went on to be the DC for Minnesota. He's done a great job with that defensive unit over the last few years.
Am I right in saying that Mike Tomlin recently said that he believed Brian Flores was still the best non-head coaching coach in the league? You know, it might have alluded to some influence that he might still hold. You know, whether he still has the Rooney family's ear in terms of who goes forward. Yeah, so I mean that would be an interesting one to follow as well.
Yeah. So, you know, they're going to do their due diligence. There's a lot of head coaching vacancies available for the Pittsburgh Steelers to kind of compete against. But if you got a chance to coach the Pittsburgh Steelers, you know, that's a legendary organization. You know, one of the more recognizable professional organizations in our country for sure, and even abroad, you know.
Yeah.
So Steeler Nation, the fan base, is built on tradition, prestige, and a championship pedigree that goes back to the 70s. And it's still relevant to today. And most organizations can't say that. And you know, when you're the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, you're instantly a known commodity. Everyone knows you. You know what I mean? So who wouldn't want that opportunity?
Yeah, but as you said, big shoes to fill, and you know, we'll have to watch this space. It's going to make the Steelers story really, really interesting for the coming year, and you know, the speculation as to whether, you know, I think that's probably the end of Aaron Rodgers. You know, Mike Tomlin was a huge, you know, factor in Aaron Rodgers going to Pittsburgh. It's hard to see him lacing up for another coach in Pittsburgh, an unknown entity. So, you know, regardless of what happens, I think Pittsburgh is going to be a very interesting story next year. So your team is gone, Bryant, and you know, you take that emotion out of it. My own team, the Packers, are gone as well. So, but I know you love football. I know you're in with CBS, and you know, as I said, you talk about this game because you absolutely love it. How do you see the season playing out? There's a lot of new teams in here. There's a lot of teams like the Bills who are feeling like this might be their time. And you've got new faces like Drake May and you know, Mike Vrabel's Patriots who are looking to bring back the greatness of the Patriots in very quick order. You've got some incredible defenses on the, you know, looking at Houston and looking at Denver. You could very well have a defensive matchup in the AFC Championship. How do you see it playing out?
I have the New England Patriots coming out of the AFC, and I have the Seattle Seahawks coming out of the NFC to represent each said conferences in the Super Bowl this year. And I actually have the New England Patriots winning the Super Bowl this year. That's been my pick, you know, throughout the entire process. So let's see how it plays out. Since the playoffs started, when the bracket was set, those were the two teams that I identify as the potential Super Bowl representatives for each conference.
Well, if you remember Shane Brennan, our host on stage in the Arlington Hotel, he's a Patriots fan, so he'd be delighted to hear your prediction. Bryant, we're about 2 weeks out from getting on the plane and heading to San Francisco. I believe we'll get to cross paths in Radio Row. So I'm really, really looking forward to seeing you in person again. Thanks a million for coming on. Appreciate you.
No problem at all. Thank you for having me.